Good afternoon. My name is Bob Giffen. I'm Director of Research at the NEST Coordinating Center. And this is the final session of today's NEST Real World Evidence Forum. So I hope you all enjoyed the test cases today. I thought they provided some really valuable insights into the workings of real world evidence, including things that are working well and also some of the areas where we might need some further development. So the purpose of this session is to kind of take a step back and look a little more broadly across the medical device enterprise and provide some different perspectives from some key players on opportunities and challenges we see in real world evidence today and in the future. Slide 2. So to provide just a couple remarks to start off, what's clear, I think, to pretty much everybody now is that clinical trial enterprise is pretty much overburdened and costly. Randomized clinical trials by themselves are in many ways inadequate to address many questions, and especially I think that's true in the medical device space. Slide 3. And I think sort of the flip side of this is that the accelerating availability of big data from many, many sources, claims, EHR, images, wearables, et cetera, as well as advanced computational tools to really interpret these data, kind of makes it imperative that we learn how to optimize the use of real world data and methods to expand our toolkit for understanding safety and efficacy of devices throughout the total product lifecycle. So we have an excellent panel today to kind of take on these issues and bring some diverse perspectives to this. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves, starting with Felipe.
Thank you, Bob. My name is Felipe Aguel. I'm the Deputy Director in CDRH's Office of Clinical Evidence and Analysis. I joined CDRH in this role about 5 months ago or so, but have reviewer and management experience in the agency dating back to 2003 and spent a little time in industry in various regulatory roles. Happy to be here today to give the perspective on real world evidence of the office within CDRH that is tasked with setting the policy and lending technical expertise to the device-specific offices that evaluate submissions that may include real-world evidence.
Thank you, Felipe. Jennifer Luray.
Yeah, hi. I am the Vice President for Strategy and Communications at Research America, which is a large an alliance of patient advocacy groups, university researchers, industry, and others who are very interested in federal support for research and policies to help move patient innovations from the bench to the bedside. I also sit on the NEST Coordinating Center's Governing Council as a patient representative. So I may make a variety of comments, but I will also be really trying to speak on behalf of the patient community today.
Thank you, Jenny. Tamara?
Thank you, Bob. Hi, I'm Tamara Skarjensen, and I'm the Director of the Coverage and Analysis Group at CMS. And what we do is we write national coverage determinations. It determines whether items and services are covered for the fee-for-service Medicare population. We oversee all of our local coverage determination policies. These are policies that are done at the local level. And what underpins all of those policies is evidence. So really the core of anything we do in my group is evidence-based. And so real-world evidence, it's really trying to decide how we're going to use that to determine what should the coverage policy be for the Medicare population. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. Well, as you can see, we have a great panel today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing this discussion, as I'm sure you all are. I'd like to begin by posing a question for all of the panelists to consider. So as we've just talked about, the test cases really provide valuable insights into some of the ways that real-world evidence can contribute to clinical and regulatory decision-making. And, you know, some real successes here, but also they pointed out some real challenges. And I wanted to ask the panelists how they would characterize kind of where we are on this journey of adopting real-world evidence and considering it, you know, as a fully mature part of the clinical research armamentarium we have. Maybe I'll begin with Felipe.
Sure. Thank you, Bob. So as you know, many of the test cases were designed to demonstrate feasibility, whether methodological feasibility or the feasibility of identifying a sufficiently large sample size within a chosen data source. You know, where we'd like to be is in a place where before executing a study, we are confident in the quality and completeness of a data source so that when a study is executed, we can be fairly confident that we will be able to test the hypothesis we're looking to evaluate. In other words, we want to be confident ahead of time that the methodology to be used and data completeness will result in an adequate sample size and a study that when executed will allow us to answer the question that it was designed to answer and not come up with an inconclusive result because of data quality issues or incompleteness in the data or other factors that we must overcome.
Thank you. And I wanted to point out that I'd be very happy for you all to respond and to ask each other questions as well. So let's make this as informal a discussion as we can. So any others?
I'm deferring to my other regulator colleague here, and then I'm happy to jump in.
So Tamara, let me just ask you to think about, you know, how far along are we? I mean, are we, as Felipe discussed, we need to make sure that the evidence we're getting is reliable and that we're pretty certain that it's answering the question that we're asking. Do you think we're there, or how close are we? How far do we have to go?
Well, I think there are quite a few articles out there in the public that do not say that we are there yet. And that's not an official agency position. But I think there is some ways to go. I think we all need to agree on, you know, what are the standards that we need for real-world evidence. And so that we do have confidence in the data, that it's telling us what it's telling us, and that we can trust that data and then to move forward on that data. CMS has used real-world evidence for a long time. We use claims data for quite a bit of things. We have a few national coverage determinations that use evidence development where we're using claims-based data to have it so that it has broad access, yet still we're able to look to make sure that it is actually playing out the way that either the RCTs or other studies have said it would in a smaller population. So I certainly think that we're all in the space trying to figure it out. I think that we all agree that real-world evidence is likely a good thing, but I don't know that there is agreement across the board yet on, you know, where are the standards, you know, how rigorous is it? And so I still think there needs to be some agreement around that. And as well as I think I've read a few articles, I think transparency really needs to be, you know, we need to make sure that it's very transparent so that we know where the data is coming from, how we got there, what is the methodology, all of those things, because transparency also then breeds confidence in the data. So I do think we're on the journey, and hopefully, you know, eventually we'll get there where we all agree. But I don't know that all of us, my guess is even on the panel, I don't know that we all agree yet where we even are on that journey for real world evidence.
I'll just add that the patient community has become increasingly expert in this area to the extent to which one can. It's an evolving area, but I really credit the National Health Council in particular for doing a number of training sessions. I'm sure you and your colleagues have participated because patients really can't contribute unless they really understand the framework. So I think the patient community is definitely well on its way and exploring registries to act as complementary data, and also looking at wearables as a way to actually improve data that matters to patients. And perhaps this is something we can get into later, but EMR data isn't necessarily what is important to patients. And so how do we bring those key factors in to the real world data process going forward?
Yeah, those are excellent points. Excellent points. So Felipe, your group at FDA has recently published a guide to, I think, reviewing 90 different real-world evidence studies that that resulted in some sort of regulatory submission going back over quite a few years. So it's great. It's a great body of work and very helpful. That has probably given you and your colleagues at FDA a pretty interesting and unique perspective on the evolution of real-world evidence over time. What does that arc look like after doing that work? And maybe you could tell us a little about that study that you did.
Sure. Would be happy to give a little background on the publication as well as the findings, and then just share some thoughts as to what are some things that we can do to advance the field. So the recent publication you just alluded to includes 90 illustrative examples of regulatory decisions based on real-world evidence. It was published in mid-March and accompanied by a Voices blog by our center director and the Jeff Shurin, and the director of the Office of Clinical Evidence and Analysis, Daniel Caños. It is not an all-inclusive list of all submissions that included RWE or all decisions. It is a sample of submissions that relied on real-world evidence, either as a sole source, a primary source, or a secondary source of clinical evidence upon which the regulatory decision was based. It includes only information that is otherwise publicly available. So there are other examples that were not included, both successful as well as unsuccessful uses of real-world evidence. By definition, we could only put out what was otherwise publicly available, and in cases where the real-world evidence was deemed to not meet the grade, that is not publicly available, so they're not included in the publication. What we observed is that the examples include a variety of data sources, span all review offices within CDRH, all the clinical specialties, and span multiple regulatory purposes within the total product life cycle. We can glean several things. There seems to be an upward trend in the number of yearly regulatory decisions based on real-world evidence. That hopefully doesn't come as a surprise. The cohort of submissions that was studied to curate these examples was from 2012 to 2019. There seems to be increasing use of real-world evidence outside of the cardiovascular devices field, a field where the use of real-world evidence was most prevalent early on. And although registries are still the most frequently used data source, other sources have been leveraged for regulatory decision-making. It's the other thing that we just need to keep in mind is that it is crucial for relevance and reliability, that is the validation of outcome and ascertainment of device use and quality and provenance of the data, to be demonstrated within submissions. To Tamara's point earlier, where she alluded to standards for the data quality, we agree that that would be a huge step forward, as this determination of whether the data is fit for purpose on a case-by-case basis is very challenging, and it would be much more predictable and straightforward to have standards where we could have an assessment with the real-world evidence coming in that says we met the following standards, we didn't meet the following standards, but that's okay because very similar to the way CDRH leverages standards in engineering fields, for example. So that's, I think, a place where NEST could really play a role in advancing the field by helping to define those quality standards that can hopefully be agreed upon across the medical device ecosystem. Another place where NEST might be able to move the field forward is to act as data aggregators to combine data sources while ensuring provenance and maintaining transparency such that sample sizes across data sources can provide the necessary statistical power to test hypotheses. Finally, I'll say that NEST can certainly continue to undertake projects that demonstrate feasibility of cutting-edge methods and data sources, bringing value to stakeholders, and then having accumulated the experience and knowledge across the test cases and other projects, apply those lessons learned to new projects and building upon that accumulated experience. So in a way, a single entity doing a single study would not necessarily have the wealth of lessons learned and experience to draw upon that NEST might be able to do if they're involved in many a test case and they've been there and done that to advise future studies.
That was a great, great response. You touched on so many different things and actually highlighted some areas where NEST is really working aggressively. And one of those, of course, is developing data standards. Becoming an aggregator is a great aspiration. We're not there yet, but that would be, I think, in the active surveillance arena, we're moving in that direction very quickly. And so, yeah, I mean, that was a very helpful overview, and thank you for that. I thought I would turn to patients, which Jenny, you mentioned before. So how do patients really benefit, in your view, from real world evidence, and how can we make it even more relevant for them than it is? Because right now it's locked away in EHRs, like you said, and but it needs to be, patient involvement needs to be very much front and center. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the patient community has done a lot of work in terms of how to incorporate patient preferences and patient needs in traditional RCT studies. So I think we can take some of that experience and bring it into this one in terms of data that's meaningful. So, high quality data, but data that is meaningful to patients is really critical. But there's no question that real world data offers advantages to patients. In the RCT space, you have a group of patients who are in a control group. And that may or may not be time wasted in a sense, in terms of their therapeutic needs. So I think that it's a wonderful opportunity for patients. And I think NEST can really take the lead in working, with the patient community on methodologies for bringing that patient perspective in at the very beginning, not having to retrofit, which is so often the case. FDA with its, has been much more focused on bringing in, patient preferences, a little bit more on the drug side, I think, than on the device side. But I think the FDA really values the patient perspective. And there's just tremendous amount of opportunity in terms of how do we include that at the outset, as opposed to having to retrofit.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Any other thoughts on the patient side from either of you?
Sure, Jenny, absolutely. The agency is very interested in dialing in patient preference information and the patient perspective into studies. And as you mentioned, it's important that that be done prospectively. It's not as helpful to do it after the fact as it is in the study design. And the Center for Devices is very interested in doing that. There are some test cases that NEST has undertaken looking at patient preference information, and there are certainly examples that where that was a key part of the decision-making process. Another part from the regulatory perspective where patients' interest in real-world evidence is absolutely there, is in getting new devices to market faster, but equally important. We always think about real-world evidence accelerating access to this new device and this new treatment, but there are other uses that would certainly benefit patients, like getting devices on label. So a device is put out on the market based on some clinical evidence source. The device is used by physicians as they see fit and best for their patients. And many times it's not feasible to conduct a second study to expand indications or change the indications. And that's where collecting that data in a robust fashion might get us there to the point where we can expand the indications, provide adequate instructions for use to improve patient care. And that doesn't even touch upon things like post-market surveillance or informing device design iterations as potential benefits to patients from the use of real-world evidence.
That is such a great point in terms of expanding the use of devices that have already been approved. I wanted to ask you and Tamara, and Bob, I'm taking your lead in terms of asking my panelists questions about registry data, because that is data that a lot of patient groups along with their specialty societies have invested in. And I would love to hear your thoughts on the value of registry data. What can the patient community do to improve that data? And how do you see that as playing a role in terms of the use of real world data?
So I'll start. First of all, I wanted to reiterate, Jenny, that I agree wholeheartedly that the patient needs to be the center of this. And I think many points that you were making, we at CMS have been trying to make for a very long time. So our population is the Medicare population. When you get a device, a drug, or anything approved through the FDA, there is no requirement that any data is needed for the Medicare population, which is really important when you're talking about a population. There are some of us are getting healthier perhaps when we're getting older, but in general, this population has other comorbidities and things we need to think about when treatments or options are given to them from their clinician. And so we really need to so if these devices are being used in specific populations, it's really starting from scratch, like talking to the patient, saying, what is important to you? What is it that we need to include in these trials? And I think, so you can start there at the FDA, but I think there is a lot of great information that we can have. Once it is approved from the FDA that, it's safe and effective, it does what it says it does, but now does it bring value? Mm-hmm. Does it help these patients? And I specifically am thinking about the Medicare population. Are we giving them high value care? Is this real, everything that's going on with you, what is important to you? And so I think when you put in these implementation studies where you have, like you said, RCTs, they're very controlled. Now let's get it out into the population, see what it can do. So you can do implementation studies, and real world evidence is key in all of that. And what is most important is what is important to the patient, what is important to the payer so that we're paying for the right things and incentivizing the right things and giving the choices to clinicians to offer to patients, saying these 3 things are here. Here's what we know about these 3 things because, we're looking at real world evidence, and here are the options you have in front of you. And so the opportunity is here. We just now need to figure out everything we talked about earlier. Where do we trust the data? What is the methodology so that patients can trust what they're hearing? Clinicians will offer it because they're trusting what they see. And so we're working together to get there. And so I really appreciated the comments that you made because I think that is exactly what we try to say as well. And, we need to bring in the patient more often, or groups of patients more often to hear these types of questions. So a long way to say thank you. And then as far as registries, I think registries are really, really great. And we have certainly supported a lot of registries in national coverage determinations. And there's been a lot of great things that have come out of these registries. So for example, I think in one, the ACC NCDR registry, there's over 70 publications that are peer reviewed that have been out there to help, shape how they're going to use these different devices. And so I really think there's a place for registries, but I also think, registries take a while to stand up. And so are there other avenues we can use outside of registries to get some of this information, when registries may not be the right thing for us to use? So get the same information, have confidence in that information, and to give patients choices in the different treatments that they would like based on their lifestyle.
Thanks.
So, Jenny, I'll just mention that registries have been traditionally the main source of real-world evidence for decision-making and otherwise that FDA relies upon. And I think there will continue to be an important role for registries. However, I also think that looking beyond registries is something we need to do because that is only a subset of the wealth of data that's out there. Just because it is in a registry doesn't mean that the quality of the data or the completeness of the data is guaranteed. And sometimes we may need to find ways to link data to fill in those gaps from other data sources. So I think there will be a role for registries in the foreseeable future, but we need to expand beyond registries, as Tamara mentioned.
Thank you both.
Thank you. So Jenny, you're the official moderator now. So no, that was great. So this next question, we're trying to get different perspectives from the ecosystem, and Tamara, you don't really represent private payers, but there is a lot of interest in the payer community and sort of how they view this. I wonder if you, Tamara, or others have a sense of kind of how payers are coming along in this. Everybody's evolving along this trajectory of adopting and using and interpreting and understanding real world evidence. Are the payers coming along kind of like everyone else, or are they, or are there ways that maybe Nest and others through different kinds of engagement can move them faster, or can they help move this enterprise faster? I'm just curious to see if any of you have a perspective on sort of the payer view of this.
Well, I'll start as a payer.
Yeah, you're a payer, but yeah.
So, yes, we do not represent, or at least my group definitely does not represent commercial payers. Although, we do look to commercial payers to see what some of the practices that they're using and, what evidence they have used to determine whether they're going to cover or not cover or something in between. And so I think as a public health agency, we've always been open to using any type of data to get to learn more about, as I said, treatment options. Because it's not necessarily specifically about a device, for example. It's really what are you doing with that device and what is around that device, who is implanting that device, what are the patient characteristics that are most successful when you use those devices. It's all of that around it. And so that is why I think, many people call them implementation studies, where you can take what you've learned in more rigorous RCTs and you can make them much larger so that many more people have access to those devices and those treatments, and you can do that with real-world evidence. I think the biggest challenge is, what is the definition of real-world evidence? It's registries, is it claims data? I mean, it's a lot of different things, and I don't know that any of us even settled on that definition yet. And so as I look at it, we have tried a lot of different ways to get the information we would like to get to answer the evidentiary gaps for the Medicare population. Does it improve their health outcomes? Less hospitalizations? What are the side effects? And I think using real world evidence will get you there, whether that is claims data. And as Felipe said, whether you have a registry and you include claims data in there to then have more information to answer these questions. I think we're all searching for easier ways to close the evidence gap, less burden, less costly, and ways that we can communicate not only with the clinical community that are using these devices, but more importantly, to the population, so that they can understand the information, so they're an informed consumer and an informed patient to then make the decisions that are important to them and their families. And I think that is the ultimate goal. So how we get there, we all need to work together to get there faster. And I will be the first to say I don't have any clear answers, but always listen to all the experts that are on the panel to try to figure out what I can do in my job to write policies, to work with the FDA, to work with folks like Jenny and the patient community to push it even a little bit further, even if it's a little bit of an experiment. And if we get it wrong, then we try something else.
Great.
So one thought that I'd like to share is the idea, maybe this is obvious, right? But the idea of real world evidence having to be fit for purpose. And because payers are looking to answer different questions, patients may be looking for different things than FDA or other regulators might be looking for. One particular source of real world data may meet the bar from a reliability and relevance perspective to answer one question with enough certainty, but may fall short to answer some of the other questions at hand. And I think agreement upon standards, and as Tamara alluded to, definitions would go a long way to making a single source. These studies are, yes, they are faster and hopefully less burdensome than a full-fledged traditional clinical trial. But we don't want to do multiple real-world evidence studies to answer all of these different questions. The ideal would be to set it up front to be able to address and be fit for purpose for multiple purposes. So being fit for purposes in a way. And there are things we can do. We talked about the quality standards, but it's not an easy goal. It's an ambitious goal. And I think that will go a long way to getting multiple stakeholders on board and executing these studies if they can double and triple dip, if you will, by having it meet multiple regulatory or evidentiary bars.
That's a great point, and I'm going to put you down as the creator of the new term "fit for purposes." You should trademark that. It's very good. Is that original? Did you just think of that?
Every now and again, it happens where thinking on the fly comes. You can add an S to a word and it sounds new.
It's just right. It's just right. I love it. Okay, so I'm a researcher, and so I like to get into the weeds a little bit. I think about things like UDI and how we need to advance UDI adoption so that we can find devices and things like that. Are there any things like that, and including that, you can certainly address UDI as well, that you think are sort of represent some key roadblocks to advancing this field? Maybe something, and it could be, it could be technical, but it could also be, educational. It could be educating, academic researchers. It could be introducing real-world evidence in the medical schools. There are many, many ways you could view this. It could be behavioral. So, are there any obvious roadblocks that kind of come to mind that we could work on?
Bob, I think you alluded to many potential ways to take baby steps toward more widespread UDI adoption. I personally don't think there is a silver bullet or that proverbial roadblock that if you removed it, now it's, the road is clear and a perfect highway. So I think all of the above. The other thing to keep in mind is, UDI certainly has promise, but it is not in and of itself a silver bullet. For example, you may be able to identify a device uniquely in a real world data source, but you may not know based on UDI alone how it was used, where it was placed. And those can be important bits of information to making sure that the evidence at hand is relevant and fit for purpose. It would be a huge step to have widespread UDI adoption, but we also need to keep in mind that it's not in all cases the end of the road. There's other information that needs to be collected systematically in order to really be able to base decisions and learn from the real world evidence, even if the UDI is available.
Yeah, that's very true and some very good points.
Felipe's comment makes me think of almost like a paradox in that not the old, but it's still current, RCT model required a lot of investment to get a minimal amount of data. I mean, the minimum data that was needed to, for evidence and to certainly go beyond that. But now we actually, on the real world data side, because of all of the information we have access to digitally, UDIs, wearables, EMRs, et cetera, the challenge is actually the opposite, right? It's how to use too much data, right? And drill down into the data that actually is meaningful or fit for purpose. So it's a very different kind of orientation. I've been working on this for a few years, not just from a patient perspective, but more broadly policy-wise, and was actually in industry when some of the initial FDA language was it was introduced during the user fee process around this. But I just think it's a big challenge. I think a lot of progress has been made. And both CMS and FDA, I think, have been very willing partners, but we are dealing with a lot of information that
Right.
needs to be sorted through to determine its value. And then, from a patient perspective, the value to patients, right?
Sure.
So,
and then I would also, to the point of UDI, it's just how do you collect that information? Because, that can get very, very granular, just from my experience of UDI and what you put on a claim form. So, which I don't know that that's the right place for it. So we also need to think about how do we easily collect the information, put it in a place, and then, as we've all talked about, how do we drill down with all this information we have to figure out, what is the data we need to answer the questions? And then again, I go back to, and that we will have confidence in the answers so that all of these stakeholders can act in their different roles, because we all have different roles, whether you're the patient, the clinician, FDA, or a payer.
And Bob, if I may, I think there's also something we should think about. You mentioned a lot of potential ways to get closer to universal UDI adoption, but I wonder if we should be also seeking short-term interim solutions that might be technological in nature, like, for example, Nest or others can think of ways to crosswalk medical device catalog numbers and other variables to hospitals' inventory systems. So crosswalking what is available to get to that unique device identifier using alternate databases to crosswalk different information systems. That might be something that is worthwhile as an interim solution as we continue to work on increasing UDI adoption.
Absolutely. Yeah, we certainly have the tools, machine learning and AI tools to enable us to start to find the data and combine it in ways that would enable us to find those exposures. So yeah, absolutely. So this has been a terrific discussion, really informative, and lots of different perspectives. A great way to end today's session. I just want to give everyone an opportunity to have any final thoughts. If you do, go ahead.
I'll just say that we look forward to continuing to partner with Nest in driving the field forward. Look forward to collaborating and participating in the multiple work streams where, whether test cases or other work streams where Nest is involved. We've been closely working in the past and hope to continue to do so in the future.
Go ahead, Tamara.
Oh, I was going to echo what Felipe just said, that yes, we look forward to working with not only with the FDA, but everyone else on the panel and Nest. I agree that this field is advancing rapidly, and I think we have a lot of really interesting and exciting opportunities in front of us to all work together to even move it quicker, to get to the goal that we all want, which is to get the right treatments to the right patients. So thank you for inviting me today.
And thank you as well. I'm very appreciative of the agency folks who joined us today and their colleagues and their willingness to go down this road, which they've been doing for quite some time. And it's very, very promising for patients. I think we just continue to have a tremendous opportunity to explore further the role that patient preferences and patient data can play.
Terrific. Well, thank you all very much for participating today. And now I will turn it over for some final remarks to Sandy Siami, our Senior Vice President of Nest.
Thanks, Bob. This has been a super program with tremendous insights into real-world evidence. I want to thank all of our presenters and panelists and you, our attendees, our stakeholders, our community. We welcome and appreciate your thoughts on the forum. Please do complete our survey when you close out of the event. And recordings will be available on our website, and the link will be emailed to everyone in the coming days. We're finalizing our dates for our next NEST Real World Evidence Forums that will occur late summer and fall. So be on the lookout for those saved dates, and don't forget to join us on June 1st and 2nd for the MDIC Annual Public Forum, where there will also be a few sessions on NEST. You can register at apf.mdic.org. Have a wonderful evening.